So today I just wanted to, take this opportunity to bring some people together to discuss exclusions. We recently passed a motion in Hackney North that was asking for a moratorium for the rest of the academic year, but also there is, a real movement to end exclusions altogether. We have various guests today. We have Diane, our MP, who's been very much at the forefront of fighting for the rights, the disparate outcomes for Black children in education. We've got No More Exclusions that have been campaigning relentlessly around this issue. We've got speakers from the National Education Union, Hackney Stand Up to Racism, who are very much at the heart of fighting racism in its many different guises. And then we also have two of our Black councillors. We have Deputy Mayor Anntoinette Bramble, who Cabinet Member for Education, has been doing some really amazing work out there around this issue and the peripheral issues that go with it. And then also we have Councillor Susan Fajana-Thomas, who has the Cabinet Brief for Communities and Security, and is also doing work around that. So I wanted to start off with having some speakers and some time to have some questions and discussion, and then have a break around 6 o'clock, because we need to be able to stretch our legs and have a little break. And then resume back and hear from a few more speakers, and then have a bit more discussion and think about how we can enact the motion that was passed and how we can support the work going forward and, direct things towards actually, having a positive impact on changing the situations with exclusion currently and how it particularly is impacting on Black children. Okay, so I would like to hand over to Diane, who's been very much, our veteran fighter on this regard. So I'm going to stop talking now and hand over to you, Diane.
Well, I'm very pleased to be able to take part in this event. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay till the end because I've got actually 2 other meetings to go to. But because this is so important, I wanted to be here. The first thing to say is that you've got some really informed people taking part, and I'm sure that we're going to have a very good discussion. But the first thing to say about exclusions, this is not a new issue. The level of exclusions of Black children has been an issue for decades. In particular, Black boys, but in more recent years, even Black girls. And although I imagine that you'll be focusing on exclusions at a secondary school level, there have also been incidents over and over of really quite young children, primary school children, or even children in early years settings being in effect excluded. So this is an important issue because it reflects on the institutional racism that our children face in the education system. It's also an important issue because exclusion, whether it's permanent, whether it's temporary, is part of the criminal justice pipeline. It's part of how so many of our children end up in the criminal justice system. There was a man called Martin Neri, who was the head of Dr. Bernardo's, a children's charity, but had also been Director General of the Prison Service. And he said years ago, but I often quote it, he said, on the day that you exclude a child from school, you might as well give them a date and a time to turn up at prison. And we've had some high-profile cases around excluded children in Hackney recently, which really illustrate that exclusion's criminal justice pipeline. So when we think about exclusions and how we take forward policies that will bear down on the level of exclusions, First of all, as I say, we have to appreciate this is disproportionately an issue with Black children. And it often points to how some teachers, and there's an NEU spokesperson here, I know, but there are some teachers who feel intimidated by Black children. And the only method of management that they can think is to exclude them. Now, that is not to say that I would defend poor behaviour, disruptive behaviour, or behaviour that actually undermines the ability of other children, Black and white, to learn. But one of the issues about exclusions is how teachers engage with children in the classroom. And one of the things I've long argued when it comes to schools is that you need more teachers in London schools that look like London, because some of the disciplinary problems might be more manageable if you had more teachers that look like London, which is not to say that Black teachers don't exclude. But I think there are issues about teachers and the teaching workforce that we need to think about. We also need to think about how we manage children short of excluding them completely from the classroom. Because actually, excluding them from the classroom, by and large, it might deal with the immediate disciplinary problem, but it often puts those young people on a road, on a very negative road, and as I've said, on the road into the criminal justice system. We've heard that recently in Hackney, exclusions on the rise. I find this very sad because some of us have been talking about exclusions in London schools, including Hackney, for years and years. But I'm sure Anntoinette will have something to say about what she's doing. So I suppose I would close by saying this. One of the issues that I've taken a lot of interest in my 30 years as a Member of Parliament is what happens to Black children in the education system. For very many years when Ken Livingstone was mayor, I used to run an event every year called London Schools and the Black Child. And the reason I took a particular interest in education was because I feel it's so important for working class children and for working class Black and minority ethnic children that they can have a positive experience from education and they don't feel that they have been sidelined or marginalised or literally excluded. There was a generation of Black people that came to this country in the Windrush generation, you might say, who came to this country in the 50s and 60s. And they often realised that it was going to be tough for them. Tough in terms of the kind of jobs they were able to get, tough in terms of the way they were treated. But, you know, they thought that post-war generation, that even though it was tough for them, for their children, it would be better. And the mechanism they thought would make it better would be education. So my view has always been, of all the challenges that face Black and brown people in relation to the state, be it policing, be it immigration, or whatever, the way that education has failed children is perhaps the saddest and the most disheartening. I've just seen a message saying it's not individual teachers. I'm not saying it's individual teachers, but I am saying we have to address this issue of disproportionate levels of exclusion amongst Black children, because if you don't address it, really, you're writing those children off. And that's not acceptable to me. Now, it's never been acceptable to me. So I'd like to congratulate Lucy on convening this meeting. I'd like to apologise for not being able to stay till the end. But I just want to confirm the issue of exclusions, the disproportionate level of exclusions amongst Black children has been something I've been concerned about for decades. And I do hope that this meeting and this discussion can take things on further, because there's a generation of children in Hackney schools that depend on discussions like these and depends on these discussions taking the whole issue forward to ensure that all children can benefit and engage with their education. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you so much, Diane. I really appreciate that and your contribution. So just to get a bit out of what you were saying, I think it's really relevant about having more Black teachers. And also, you know, with the NEU, there's various Black educators here as well. I think it's really important, the work that is being done within the union with the anti-racist charter, but also cutting across into other areas that people here are involved with around the curriculum content. I think, you know, if we had a better grasp on our contribution through history, you know, now in the post-war era, in the past, I think that would help some of the kind of, you know, interpersonal microaggression relationships that, you know, start to be the beginning of the end for children. So I think the curriculum stuff is really important around that as well. I was thinking to ask you, you know, how do we have an impact on like the Labour Party education policy? So I know that Keir has mentioned a Labour government would bring in a Race Equality Act. And I was just thinking, you know, how do we kind of, you know, make sure that addressing these kind of issues, the very root of how institutional racism works, how do we kind of get that entwined into forward policy, you know, and really tackling disproportionality through a race equality law? If yeah, I could ask you that.
Well, it's difficult to have meetings and interaction in the lockdown, but as it happens, I am working with Simon Woolley and others to set up an all-party group on race and education. And one of the members of that group is actually Kate Green, who's Labour's education spokesperson. So I would hope, depending on what conclusions you arrive at in this meeting tonight, that it might be one way forward is for people from this meeting to meet with Kate Green, who's our education spokesperson, and tell her, I won't say face-to-face, because it probably won't be face-to-face because of lockdown, but tell her to her face what it is you want to see in Labour Party policy and education and race.
Yeah, no, that's really good to know, Diane. And yeah, and it would be great to get back to you after this meeting so we can go forward with that. So I'm going to bring Zahra in. Zahra is very much at the forefront, the creator, instigator of, you know, a powerful movement against exclusions called No More Exclusions. And I know that they've been doing amazing work, and hopefully this is a way that you guys can engage and carry on with that. So Zahra, do you want to come in and take your time to give us your take on exclusions, what you're doing, and how we go forward with that? So Zahra Bay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting us, and especially thank you to Lucy for organising this extremely and timely meeting. I've actually got Diane's article from 2002 called Teachers Are Failing Black Boys, which was included in Tell It Like It Is, edited by Brian Richardson. And it's a book that every educator should read before they step foot in a classroom, as far as I'm concerned. A third edition will come out later on this year. And also what's going to come out later on this year is a reprint of the original book by Bernard Cord. That seminal piece, really, again, every educator should read How the West Indian Child is Made Educationally Subnormal in the British School System, the Scandal of the Black Child in Schools in Britain. And sadly, I have to say, you read Diane's piece from 2002, and she says school exclusion is not a new issue. And then you read, you go even further back into time and you read Cord's piece from 1971. And I know the language has changed and we don't call children education is subnormal anymore. But that history, that legacy is still very much still within the education system. My background is as a teacher. I taught in the mainstream in North London for 10 years and then, or 8 years, I should say, to be precise, and then 11 years in AP. And I'm not in the classroom at the moment. And I understand the pressures and the difficulties of the classroom. The pressures that are in school pressures and the pressures that come from the outside. I still think that the problem of exclusions is an absolute disgrace and national scandal. And in particular, in relation to the groups that are disproportionately affected. And I suppose that's why No More Exclusion was formed just over 2 years ago. And No More Exclusion is a collection of people like myself, educators who don't believe in school exclusions, trade unionists, parents, young people, and you're going to hear from one young person after me, educational psychologists, lawyers. I mean, it's a massive collective of people who are simply saying there's got to be other ways to deal with quote unquote challenging behavior. And I say quote unquote because the number one reason why children are being excluded is not violent behavior. It's not drugs. It's not weapons. It's persistent disruptive behavior. We're really bracing ourselves for the way in which this return to school is going to go. How everyone's talking about mental health and well-being and how children are coping. Everyone's talking about, the debate between the recovery plan, for example, versus catch-up. What should be the focus? And in the midst of all of this, where are the children's voices? And finally, one thing I want to do before I pass over, if that's all right, Lucy, because I didn't want to talk for too long, is the importance of looking at exclusion through an intersectional lens. It's absolutely vital that we look at who are the groups disproportionately affected. Children on free school meals, children with special educational needs and disabilities, boys massively overrepresented. So gender and disability and race and socioeconomics, all these things cannot be looked individually. We've got to look at these things intersectionally as well if we're going to make a dent. And finally, I'd say that we're working in multiple ways to get to the point where we have no more exclusions. I think the move by Hackney, we've heard about no more exclusions or having a no exclusion policy in year 7 is a really good start, and I want to commend Hackney for making that move. But to us, it's just the beginning. It's certainly not where the highest number of exclusions occur. They actually occur in the GCSE years. Highest number is recorded around year 9, year 10, where schools are basically getting rid of kids in preparation for the exams. It's just as simple as that. So we've got to just really be honest. What we don't want a parity in exclusion. We don't want, particular groups to be excluded as much as other groups. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for real equity, real inclusion. We're looking for teachers to get support and training. We're looking at the curriculum, as Lucy was saying, that needs to be really completely overhauled because of what the farce and what's happened to it under the Gove years and since. And definitely we need more black teachers in the and also black teachers at all levels, not just dealing with pastoral issues, not just dealing with with the most difficult classes. We need that right through the education system. Children need to be able to see themselves represented and inspired and not marginalized and kind of made to feel as though their experiences are not valid. So I'm going to pass over back to you, but thank you very much for inviting us. And I would say, please support our moratorium. Unfortunately, our website is down at the moment, but I'll share links with Lucy if anybody wants to support. And we're always looking for people to get involved with No More Exclusions. Thank you, Lucy.
Oh, you're welcome. So if you want to put those details in the chat, Zahra, I was just thinking about the zero tolerance. That is very much an academy thing, but it's also just so disproportionate to how a lot of people's lives are. And if you think about, young carers or sibling responsibilities, like the regimes that people are under, and how that starts your day and then how that goes on through the day. We have to realize that we are dealing with young people going through adolescence. And I think also as well, if we're thinking about developing education policy, we really do need to think about the mental health aspect, but also how we change, how we teach, how we interact with young people, and how we nurture them, interacting with each other. And that, there's so many aspects to what we need to change, particularly when we think about the post-COVID world. So, yeah, I mean, I just have to commend you, Zahra, like what you're doing, but also hopefully we can feed into what Diane was talking about with the parliamentary group that are coming together and really have an input into the Labour Party policy and, really start to tackle those deeply, disparate outcomes that are based in how institutional racism works. So, Zahra, would you like to introduce Kadeem as a member of the organisation, and then the floor is yours. Then I'm assuming we're going to hear from Chuma after that, yeah?
Yeah, that's fine. Just to say, one of the young members of No More Exclusions, Kadeem, has agreed to come and speak to us today. I don't want to really tell you the details of his story. That's his stories for him to tell in his own voice. Thank you, Lucy.
Hi, Kadeem. The floor is yours. Welcome to Hackney North. Hey there.
Yeah, I'm doing okay. My name's Kadeem. I'm youth voice and youth leader with No More Exclusions. And I guess my journey with exclusion started in primary school. Being removed from education for suspected autism or Asperger's, but eventual oppositional defiance disorder, which was the label that stuck, which facilitated obviously I guess me being taken out of mainstream education, because once I got my diagnosis, I didn't go back to mainstream education. But I'd say at the point I got my diagnosis, exclusions kind of slowed down to a degree. But before I was diagnosed, obviously a lot of the labeling was just I like to argue, I'm disruptive, challenging, a lot of the things that have been mentioned in there basically. And I guess I grew up kind of feeling very unheard. Feeling unheard. So I was diagnosed when I was 10, but I was first excluded from, off-road. It wasn't a new phenomenon. I'd say it's a very old tragedy, because I was off-road when I was 6 by a teacher that ended up being removed from my position because of siphoning funds from the learning disability and support that the school received. But that was a while after, obviously, me being excluded, 12 years precisely. So I suffered as a result of this person being in charge of the school. But anyway, so I was flagged there by this person, or flagged there. And obviously the labels followed me to my next school, where I was one of 2 black boys in the class for probably about a week, and then we were split apart. And I was just getting excluded from that school as well. I just kept getting excluded. One day exclusions, just not really spending a lot of time in class basically. So I'd get sent out of class and I'd spend a lot of time with they ended up getting someone in to support, obviously, like a like a TA first, so I'd spend a lot of time playing chess in like out of class. So I developed a liking for chess, and I kind of got adverse to punishments. And I kind of thought, okay, I'm gonna go play chess. So I guess I stopped kind of valuing my lessons in the same way. Yeah. But it never helped as well that after every exclusion or throughout the years where I was excluded, I wasn't actually falling behind academically as well. So that was another problem, I guess, like what Diane was saying about threats from pupils. And I feel like I more suffered from being placed in educational enclosure rather than any violent or like behavior that would kind of ensure that a person didn't return to mainstream school or was in alternative provision for 7 years, because that's how long I was in alternative provision, literally from 9, being in a child secure unit for a few months where I was diagnosed and sectioned as a young person, to then going into one-to-one mentoring for a year, and then spending 5 years in Peru, which was sold as a school. Even though it was a small classroom, I still felt it was a school. And obviously my mum, throughout this process, it was always to not end up in a Peru because of how they were described. Students smashing chairs over each other's heads. And I never saw that personally in the 5 years, just to take away the stigmas. But I don't know, there wasn't a lot of positive stories from Peru. And like I'd say I was focused still in that environment, very focused in that environment, but focused because the incentive was me being taken out of there and put back into mainstream school, basically, as they do. But obviously that never materialized. I had a managed move. I wasn't allowed in my borough because I was such a tyrant, apparently, for my behaviors at between 6 and 9. So I wasn't allowed in the borough. And yeah, like I didn't receive any other assessment after receiving my first assessment of ODD. The yearly assessments weren't in place. The only thing that was in place was transport to school, which I was threatened as well about not receiving transport to school because I wasn't on time in the morning. Sometimes I guess I was relaxed because I was getting in a cab. But yeah, like I've just had to I've been very like separated from obviously like my peers, my community as well because of the managed move. Which I wasn't transitioned back into, I wasn't reinstated. And like I'd say I didn't there wasn't any barriers in entering the criminal justice system, basically. And not as in I have a catalogue of offences, but as in like first offence, it's not even my disorder, the things that I'm mentioning, the support I need is not important. And then on another occasion, I never had an intermediary to support me in court. So those are things that, like, I'd say a majority of young people being statemented would need as well in court to understand what's going on. But I don't know, I managed to get that support, but maybe it was too late because I was already in the criminal justice system. And like I just talk about a lot of things that have involved me personally on my journey with education, because it's been a journey, definitely. expedition. But yeah, like
Sorry, Kadeem. No, I really appreciate you sharing your journey, but also as well, like what you're doing with your experience to kind of like highlight things and help other people. Like, I mean, you can't go back in time, but what you're doing is making sure that those things don't continue to happen, and also as well, like I'm sorry to have to shut you down, because we've got to move on with the talk, but I just was hoping that you could just let people know, like, what you have been able to achieve, because like you come across as someone who's skilled, got a level of intelligence that you need to be able to like be creative and express yourself. So could you just could you share that with us?
Well, I got 8 GCSEs out of pupil referral unit, even though I could only do foundation papers. I don't know if the plan worked. But yeah, like I'm trying to study criminology as well now, with what I've learned or what I know and what I'm applying, I guess. But yeah, thanks for listening and thanks for stopping me as well.
No, thanks for sharing, but also like good luck in what you're doing, and like kind of taking an experience like that and turning it into something positive is a brilliant thing to be doing. And I hope that it does help you feel better when you think about the struggle and journey that you've been on. So thanks for sharing. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you.
If people want to put any questions in the chat, please feel free to that. But I'm going to hand over to Chuma now. Welcome.
Hi there, evening everybody. Yes, my name is Chuma Akuchie, and I'm a teacher based in East London, and I've been working with No More Exclusions for the past 2 years. My background is I've been a teacher in alternative provision, so I've been working in crews across North London, East London, Northwest London, and for the past 2 years now, I've transitioned into mainstream school. Reason being because I wanted to, when you work in AP, you see patterns, okay, of the kind of kids that come through the doors on a monthly and yearly basis. And, I was working in AP for about 7-8 years. And I just got really frustrated seeing those same patterns year on year. So I decided it was time to leave AP. And in line with doing my master's in educational leadership, I wanted to go back to mainstream and see what I can do from the other side, see how I can affect education from the other side. I think before I'll start, I'll just say that I know Kadeem from Enemy, and I've heard Kadeem's story so many times, and every time I hear it, it does not lose its effect on me. Do you see? Because that is a story that we need to make sure that we stop. We need to make sure we don't get any more situations whereby we are excluding young people that have infinite amounts of potential purely based on our understanding or lack of understanding of that child. You see, it's something that we need to do. So, I believe that exclusion should not be in the vocabulary of education in any way, shape, or form. Full stop. And what I will say is that I will go on to giving you a quote from Nelson Mandela, who says that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Okay, and on the topic of weapons, when we look at nuclear weapons delivery systems, we look at the methods through which the warhead is delivered to its target. Okay, so we're talking about intercontinental ballistic missiles, the best ways to make sure that this warhead gets to its target. And when we speak of discrimination, prejudice, and institutional racism, unfortunately, education is the number one delivery system of those things. And that is something that we have to accept and realize, and we have to, because we can't change it unless we accept that education is the number one delivery system for the ills, a lot of the ills we see in our society. And we look at off-rolling, we've spoken of internal exclusions, we've seen isolations, isolation booths, a whole raft of mechanisms that we use to correct children's behavior that unfortunately puts them more in danger than actually saves them. And I've seen this because I've gone on like a journey from working in alternative provision. I've worked in about 5 different school settings, right? That was part of the journey, to see how different schools are looking after these children. I've been to academy trusts, I've been to trust schools, religious schools, state schools, community schools, and I've really got a really well-informed picture of what schools are doing, what works and what doesn't work. And, you know, quite often I see things that don't work. I see things that don't work, and I've had to step in on numerous occasions to try and recover situations, right, that could easily go left with a young child, and it's not good enough. We need to do more. We just have to do more. And a lot of that comes from what I understand, from the power dynamic that's involved in education. Okay, and it's the same thing in politics as well. When we speak of power that is unchecked, power that, how can I put it? Whereby if we can't see the true intentions, okay, of this power dynamic, then what happens is that we get abnormalities, we get malignant tumors, okay, that take the form of institutional racism, that manifest themselves as discrimination, prejudice, and we see this all the time. And I have seen the very end of it. We look at what happened with the 2 young boys in Hackney. We look at Jaden Moody, to Sharon Ed, rest in peace to both of them, and we look at the main, one of the main outcomes from the serious case review was that exclusions was a catalyst, right? It was a catalyst that resulted in their deaths. Okay, and then we need to then take steps back and then work our way back down the chain to look at what went wrong here, so that we don't repeat these mistakes. We look at, and off-rolling, for example, going back to off-rolling, that is a key example of the abnormalities that can happen, that can manifest itself in the education system. And like Zahra said, and I've often experienced, the exclusions, they happen year 9, year 10. When I was working at AP, it was always year 9, year 10. We were always looking to get kids in year 9 and year 10 up until the Easter period. Why? Because of exam results. Schools did not want these disruptive children to negatively affect their results and negatively accept their position on league tables. That was the main reason why these kids were getting excluded. And when they came to the Pro, these kids weren't bad kids. They weren't acolytes of Adolf Hitler. They were good people that were just misunderstood, but still set on a trajectory that puts them at the front door of prisons, and it just can't go on. It just can't go on. We look at information from the unexplained pupil exits reports from the EPI. 61,976 pupils suffered from unexplained exits from school in 2014. And that number increased to 69,299 in 2017. That is 69,000 pupils that suffered an unexplained exit from school. They were off-road or either put on a managed move from school to get them off the books. This is something that we can't We can't sit by and accept anymore. We have to work collectively to address this issue, and it means having some uncomfortable conversations to do that.
Sorry, thank you.
Sorry, just say the last thing. Just the last thing, please. What this pandemic is showing us is that there's a future, there's a tomorrow that we can now see that we actually never saw before. We're looking now at working from home. We're looking at one glove fits all for exams being cancelled. We're now looking at decentralized currencies. And now we can look at a world without exclusions, right? So this is the time to put the moratorium, enemies moratorium on exclusion. This is the time to actually make a better tomorrow for our young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chuma. Yeah, that was like really powerful stuff there. Like you've raised some really important points. Like talking about power being unchecked, I think that's really important. And just, you know, as we were saying, how this is very much a mechanism, and it's a mechanism that has an impact for the rest of your life. You know, and a lot of people have been through experiences. Some people fight on, but you know, some people fall to the wayside. And you know, like it's really important that, you know, we tackle this because of the impact that it is having. I've got Jane that wanted to ask a question. So Jane, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's a question and a comment, if that's okay, Lucy.
Okay.
Yeah. So greetings from Hackney NEU and also from Hackney Stand Up to Racism, which I've kind of been asked to send message support from both of that. I know my colleague Richard Rieser is going to speak later about sort of exclusions from the NEU point of view. But I think a couple of things that I think are really important, and I'm not going to start saying, you know, teachers are blameless in that, because I absolutely don't think they are. I think sometimes as an individual teacher, you can deal with situations wrongly, but it's an institutional problem, and it's a problem with attitudes that you have to actually think about. And I think you have to get that balance right. You know, all teachers are part of the solution, and I think Black teachers are part of the solution in all sorts of levels. You know, and I think if you put it in the context of the sort of renewed hostile environment over the last sort of 10 years, the appalling onslaught we're getting on Black history, for example, at the moment from the government, you know, the whole issue in Hackney around the statue of the slaver at the Museum of the Home, but more generally the stuff about, you know, we shouldn't be actually talking about history, I think is an absolute disgrace, and it contributes to a whole atmosphere in which it is acceptable to push students out of school when we shouldn't. So I think, you know, you should think about it in this whole context, but also, as Zahra absolutely said, the whole way back to Bernard Cord 40 years ago. And it's shocking that we've still actually got that issue in our schools now. And actually it's getting worse, not better, for all sorts of reasons. So, but I think some very specific things that I think we should think about institutionally. I like Diane's point about Black teachers. I don't think Black teachers are the only answer. I think you've got to engage white teachers and support staff as well. But actually, I think, you know, I think Hackney could really do a good job working with one of our universities, for example, and actually set up a scheme to recruit Black teachers into our schools from the local population. I think that could be incredibly powerful as a sort of, you know, as a way of equalising out the education system, if you like, and bringing those experiences into schools. I also think, and I'm not sure how many parents are on this call, but it really strikes me there is a big disconnect between schools on the one hand and parents on the other. And I think there needs to be training in schools about this. But I also think that actually, and I say this to Anntoinette, I think in particular, how can Hackney actually really publicise to parents what their rights are, how they get advice, how they can actually go forward and, you know, help challenge some of the unjust exclusions, you know, the girl who was excluded because of her hairstyle, for heaven's sake, last year, but also some of the things that are supposedly unacceptable behaviour, but actually just quite often need much better treatment.
But just thinking about what was just being said from Chuma as well, the unexplained, you know, the way that young people are dropping out of school as well. I think there's also a connection there with county lines phenomena. You know, if you already feel like you're not wanted in school and you're under certain restrictions, and you know, in provision, or it's not really, followed through and all of that. We've got young people slipping through the net, going into that, and the impact that's having on them and their families, that is unexplained absences and people dropping out of education. I think the teacher training definitely, but for all teachers, there needs to be an element within teacher training, and hopefully we can kind of talk about that, looking at policy and education policy and how that is implemented, and also, how we support. I'm hoping we'll have a bit more information to offer parents around support, and also how we can get more governors involved in schools. So, Chuma, I was just thinking how you felt about the kind of the county lines element of it. And if anyone else has got a question, please put it in the chat box.
I think, again, it just points to neglect ultimately. Do you see? Listen, one thing I've learned working in education is that I can't save everyone, right? We can't save everybody. But however, when we look at the county lines issue, we have to ask ourselves, have we given all we can? Have we exhausted all of our options to make sure that these children are looked after and their well-being is really at the forefront of everything we are doing? And I can't truly say as an institution, as a system, I can't say yes. There are good efforts being made, but I mean across the board, there are some great examples that are just not being followed. And I've been in certain schools whereby kids who are just dumped in isolation booths every day, every single day they're dumped, and then that is the precursor to permanent exclusions. So it starts from the classroom. It starts from the classroom.
Zahra, do you want to come in? We've got 1 minute. Do you want to come in on that?
I just wanted to say that, I mean, as someone who wasn't born in this country, I've always found it really shocking how we treat children here from age of criminal responsibility, age of 10 is one shocking thing. Just the way in general children are expected to be seen and not heard. The same child considered to be cute and cuddly at 2, and it's a menace to society by 14, particularly when that child is male and black or brown. It's just shocking to me that we're not looking beyond, even without leaving the island, just looking to Scotland. Even I was speaking to a teacher from Ireland 2 days ago, an educational psychologist, and she was similarly saying how shocking it is to see how we exclude children here, and we do it so naturally, like it's of course that's what you do. Are we saying that we have got worse children in this country, in the island and Scotland? Is that what we're saying? And so I think we need to have a serious reckoning with what inclusion means, what is exclusion. Is it really last resort? Of course it's not being used as last resort. Who are the ones who are disproportionately being affected, as Diane said, for decades? And we can't have another 50 years or 20 or 30 years like this. There's too much suffering. And with the pandemic, all of that is being amplified and magnified and multiplied. So really, I have to say, for me, for all of us that are working on this, this is the time. We think we've got an opportunity for making some, serious change now. And we really hope that, people that have been taking the time to listen to this talk tonight and everything that's been said and will be said, because there's other speakers, will consider seriously how they can support and how we can move to a position where exclusion is not a word in our dictionary at all. Thank you, Lucy.
Brilliant. Thanks, Zahra. So, Kadeem, just before we go for a break, I do have a question for you, and other people. We will come back to have a more of a question discussion if people want to make contributions. But Kadeem, I just wanted to ask you, hearing about your experience, and the longevity of what occurred. I just wondered, how you felt when you realised that this is a thing, this is something that seems to happen disproportionately to young men like yourself. I just wondered, you know, if that kind of like helps you make sense of what you experienced.
Yeah, it did. I'd say I was aware of it as well, but not aware of the disproportionality as in the numbers behind it. Like, I didn't see how everything kind of interlinked. So I've definitely learned a lot more about just my positionality as obviously a black man with special needs. Even though I've been oppositional to the idea of it, it still affects me in a way. So I'd say just through personal experiences and just being in and around people who are having similar conversations and talking about the issue, really.
Yeah, you really are providing support to other people yourself, so thanks for that. And then I was gonna bring in Anntoinette and Susan, so they can come into the conversation and tell us more about, you know, like down on the ground what is happening in Hackney. But also as well, I think it's important that, you know, in relation to the Labour Party, you know, I've always felt that Hackney very much is at the forefront in many respects. And, you know, I think like leading by example is really important, you know, so it's how we can, you know, push out good practice further afield. I know Sophie's here. The scrutiny meeting on children and young people looking at disparity was really interesting, and it's, you know, clear that there's a lot of valuable work going on. So if we could hear from Richard. So Richard, I'm going to give you 7, if that's okay.
Sure, thank you very much, and it's good to be here. I think what we've heard already is quite a few references to, is not just about institutional racism, it's also linked up with labelling of people because of their special educational needs disability in all the cases that we heard. And I think one of the problems is that schools, while professing to be inclusive, are not particularly inclusive. And the reasons for that are several. One is government policy, which is against inclusion, and funding, which is against inclusion. They've been cutting money on SEN and special needs for a significant amount of time. Secondly, the training that teachers get doesn't equip them for this. They get about half a day on special educational needs and nothing on inclusion. They are being trained more and more for delivering a sort of digitized curriculum, if I can put it in that way, and not using their initiative to actually develop a curriculum to suit the students that they've got in the classroom. And that is a real problem, driven by the league tables and national testing. And all of these things will impact on the children who are least able to cope with it. And many of them are from black ethnic minorities, but also there's quite a high level of exclusion of white students from working class backgrounds. We need to realize that this isn't just a race issue, it's a class issue, and it's also about disableism. And the education system for the last 60 years has been built on a eugenicist model that we only want those who can achieve at certain levels, i.e. meet IQ tests, which is what our current SATs are, and we're not really very interested in the others. And the comprehensive ideal, which was around in the 70s and 80s, that we would be providing education for all. Of course, Labour rejected that as the bog standard comprehensive. Rather than funding it and supporting it, it went on the road to setting up academies and all sorts of other things. And then people have talked about how academies are dealing with these zero tolerance policies. Now, one of the things I do is sit on the SENDIS tribunal, and we can adjudicate there on whether schools have discriminated against students by unlawfully excluding them. And I would urge parents who are here and others, if your child has a diagnosis, or even if they don't, of SEND, to challenge the school and take it to, it's a free thing, to take it to the SENDIS tribunal. And that's the only body in the country that has the power to overturn the exclusion and quash all the other exclusion from the child's record. Now, this is quite important because what is going on is disableism is, I think most teachers would be aware of racism and think that they're dealing with it. Maybe they are, not so much because of the institutional pressure on them. But very few teachers recognize in themselves disableism because the room that they have to operate is less. So, for instance, if we look at the national figures, a child who is with SEN but not a EHC plan is 5.3 more times likely to be excluded than the majority of children without SEN, 5.3 times more. And then similarly on those with a plan, 2.9 times more. And these are the national figures. They vary considerably, and one can go right down to break them down. Now, Hackney currently has overall is the second highest in London after Islington at 7.06 fixed term exclusions compared to 7.91 in Islington. All the other areas are less. But they're not the highest in the country. The highest in the country are where the exclusions are where they're largely white working class areas, and they're at 19, 20. So that we have to see this as a wider issue. Yes, it is about racism, but it's also about rejection of a whole series of children. And to me, it seems it's fundamentally about class. But the schools are meant to be able to cope with everyone, and that's what we have to do. And so I would suggest some things that we could do. Hackney, along with the other Labour London boroughs, could form a compact that they were actually going to work together with the schools in their area, and they have to negotiate with the schools because the schools are no longer under local authority control, but they have ways of doing that through schools forum and so on, that we had a compact of zero exclusions and real support for inclusion. And that might mean diverting money. So one of the things that's been most effective in secondary schools in stopping exclusions is mentoring projects. Now, if we look at the redundancies and the jobs that have been cut across our secondary schools, it's been the mentors that have gone over the last 5 or 6 years. These are young people who've come through the system, made sense of it, and can talk to other young people about this and how they can...
Sorry, please, can you wind up? Thank you,
sure.
Thank you so much.
The other thing I think we need to do is to recognise that there aren't little silos, that there are, as we've seen, there's racism, there's disableism, there's sexism, all operating together, and of course overriding that, class. And we need to actually develop our schools as champions of the children who go to them, rather than living up to some sort of ideal that is set by Tories in Whitehall, who have very little understanding of where we are. Now, we are not near...
Sorry, Richard,
so we need to have this compact, and I'd be interested to hear what Antoinette thinks about this.
Right, okay.
Take us forward across our schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, sorry to cut you, but I do need to move on, and I need to get everyone in. But yeah, so the compact between different boroughs and zero exclusion. So that does directly relate to the motion that was passed. I know Antoinette's doing some work around that. So I'm going to hand over to you, Antoinette, and you've got 10. So Antoinette, Deputy Mayor Bramble.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you so much, Lucy. First, for convening this, and as you know, I was very keen for us to do this, and we've also even spoke about how we broaden out something like this a bit deeper around solution focused. I think it's such an important issue. I'm going to be mindful of time because there is so much to say on this. For me, I think if you've read articles that I've had out, you will know that I'm absolutely speaking out against exclusions and the disproportionate effect it has on Black children. I've said that in the local press. I've said that if you Google City Hall, I was on a panel for 2 hours speaking about exclusions, and one of the quotes that they used in my time on the panel in City Hall was me saying, when exclusions is quite punitive, and I said we have to reflect in the system if we say to a child, if you have challenging behaviour and you're finding it difficult to cope in school, our response to that is you missing your education. And I continue to say, how do we do this? And this is someone that's worked within in a school system. You know, Hackney Labour fundamentally believes that it's a human right and a human gain for children to be educated. Investment in an individual child is about investment in the wider society. And the Children Education Act, which in 1944 enshrines the roles of local authorities to deliver primary and secondary school education. And it states, I'll just read this for you, Lucy and everyone, it shall be the duty of the local education authority for every area to contribute towards the spiritual, moral, mental and physical development of the community. And Hackney's Labour mission is to rebuild fairer and safer and greener, and start to support all children to have a better and a good start in life. I think this is a growing challenge in the pandemic, but also because of this Tory government. Unfortunately, the Tory government has created a political system that focuses on short-term gains and lacks long-term ambition. And what I mean by that is they have created a very fragmented education system where local authorities have less and less opportunity, that breeds forced academisation and is just setting systems up against each other. And there's no clear process of accountability of where that lies in the system. If you are a parent and you are having an issue with the education system, it's not really clear of where you go. And even if you're clear where to go, it's not always easy to navigate the system, also to get the clear results that you need as a parent. And I think that's a real shame. I think it's really important to say that, you know, government has what I would call the middle tier. So the bridge between the community and schools, the government has removed local government's role in that, and they haven't filled it with anybody else. Unfortunately, we no longer have control over schools. Schools are autonomous and they are independent now. Hear me well. I'm an elected member. I believe in democracy, but I also think there's a time when that local authority should have control, should have a say, and should have a stronger influence. And one of that, I believe, is on the school system. But we don't have that. Even with maintained schools, we are still very limited of what we can do. And academies is even a further reach. Now, Hackney is in a unique position because we have what's called our family of schools, and we use that influence over our family of schools that comes through our traded arm. And even when we built we were one of the few local authorities that could have the Building for School Futures programme. So through that, there's an influence, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't start with our challenges. School policies are left with the Department of Education through the Regional Schools Commissioners. That's who is responsible for academies, and ultimately schools. And for example, school exclusion policies are not down to the local authorities. It sits with every individual school. Now, let me tell you about the No Leads to Exclude policy. Do I think it's a great policy? Absolutely. We had a no need to exclude policy. Children were still excluded. So us saying to not have a no exclusion policy in itself does not work and isn't the way forward. Why? Because we've tried it, and despite that, it didn't work. Why? Because we don't have the control over schools to determine this has to be a policy. So we've got to think about what other things that we can do. Someone touched on off-rolling, and it's shameful that off-rolling happens. And I know that scrutiny has looked at that. And we continue to work and challenge schools that if we see a lot of movement within schools around children, Hackney education staff go in, interview head teachers and have that dialogue. But the challenge with off-rolling is really hard to prove, but officers do challenge and query that. You know, our last academic year, 40 pupils in Hackney were permanently excluded. 52% were black boys, were black, and 77% of those were boys. So clearly there's an issue in the system. I think the cuts to schools and the capacity of having support staff that can help children manage their behaviour in schools has had an impact. I do agree with that. And also, in light of the pandemic, that has become even more challenging. We coordinate and support the Child Law Advice Society to provide parents with support. So we do signpost parents of where to go and where support is. But it's not the same. The council, we are constantly working with school leaders to work on the reduction of exclusions. We have a head teachers board panel that meets and we discuss exclusions with them. So there's officers there and as members, I attend there, and Councillor Fajana-Thomas, who you're going to hear from, we are working together really closely on this, and she is very keen to get engaged. So I'm going to suggest we extend that membership to her as well, to be part of that. We do training with the education psychology team. We have what's called the re-engagement unit, and they work with schools around children that are on risk of exclusion. What we have done is we have a no need. We've tried the no need to exclude, but we've done it with year 7, and we've piloted that in schools. That has gone very, very well. So the aim is now to launch that in September across all schools. And that is also to combat the concerns that many of us have in this virtual Zoom room about when all children, God willing, September, all children are back to school. There also is the risk of exclusions then increasing. I have to say that Hackney exclusions in primary school is now lower than the England average. And I think that's a good thing. And that's something that we need to start talking about. That is positive. However, our secondary schools are not there. They are still high. Academies are higher exclusive than maintained schools as well. I think we just have to be honest and say that. But what I think we now need to do is capitalise on what is going well in primary schools, that we're able to better scaffold, support those children that have challenging behaviour or need support around their behaviour. How do we utilise what we know to extend that through to secondary school? Because why is a primary school able to support that child and manage that child? Well, even manage is not the right word. How is that school able to support that child in primary school, but why is that not then transferred and easily managed at a secondary school level? So I think we need to do that. So we're going to be doing that. Some of the things that we are doing, there's an array of things that we're doing. We're working, we've got CAMS workers in schools, which is one way. We've got the re-engagement unit, which I've mentioned before. We've got the Young Black Man's Programme initiative that looks at everything: health, criminal justice system, schools. It looks at businesses. It looks at young men in terms of wanting to be entrepreneured. But it's really important that we don't stigmatise young black men. Not all young black men are excluded. Not all young black men have a negative statistic attached to them. Even young black men that follow every societal norm in this society come from a good home, 2-parent family, never been in trouble with the judicial system. He's still less unlikely to be employed than his white counterpart, even if he is educated to university level. So we have to be honest about some of the challenges. I agree with Zahra about intersectionality, but intersectionality does not explain why young black children are disproportionately excluded. It doesn't. So we have to talk about race. We have to be comfortable about being uncomfortable talking about race. We've just got to be honest. We need to get out of our British skin and just be uncomfortable talking about something that we find difficult. We also have an exclusion and specialist support team. We also have a school improvement team. We have a speech and language therapy team. And I talked about the exclusion board also has an action plan on the back of that. And that plan also leads into the work that we're doing around Black Lives Matter. And I saw a chat about intersectionality. I'm not saying intersectionality doesn't count. I think you're right, Zahra. It really, really is important. But if you look at sectionality and you look at sectionality of someone who is white and black, a black person is more likely to be excluded. So the only other thing that's different in terms of sectionality is race. And I just think that race doesn't figure high enough when we're talking about disproportionality of exclusions. Also, I normally talk with our NQTs every year. And one of the things, have I got to wind up now, Lucy? What's my timeline?
Yeah, I've let you go over. So if you could wind up, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Two things that I would say is that I talk to NQTs every year about our programme, and one of the things that I've asked officers to do is in our NQT programme is to make sure that we're building in some of this work around exclusions. And I'm happy if someone wants to know what Hackney's doing about the diverse curriculum, I can talk to you about that and why I thought that was important to do this. I think the last thing that I want to say is this pandemic is that what I would say is the figures have reduced in Hackney around exclusions, but it's mainly around primary. But it's a bit skewed because of the pandemic, is that I hope that I've been able to demonstrate a little bit where Labour locally, the difference that we're trying to make in terms of when we're out of power nationally, and it's limited to some of the things that we can do. Lisa, I'm going to pause there because I feel like I've spoken quite a lot, but I'm hoping that I get lots of questions. But
cool.
I absolutely believe it's something that we need to tackle, and I absolutely agree it's not good enough and we need to work together to improve that. But I think Hackney's on that journey and doing lots of things to hopefully address the concerns.
Yeah, no, thank you, Deputy Mayor Anntoinette Bramble. And from being in the party, you are leading in many ways on this issue, on these issues, and doing what you can to make the changes. And like you say, there's only so much you can do in relation to the local authority and the schools. So I'm wondering, could that be part of a policy that we bring schools back into local authority, kind of like supervision? I'm also thinking as well about Ofsted, like when we think about the internal exclusions, like there has to be some kind of accountability. Like Ofsted is one way that people go in and look. I don't know if that could be looked into. So it would be good to kind of come back and have a bit more discussion. But what I would like to really do, because I'm not sure how much time Sharon has, I just wanted to bring in Sharon, see if she could just talk to us for about 5 minutes, just about some of the work she's doing and how having more Black governors really can be effective in this situation. So Sharon, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Lucy. Sorry I joined late. I literally left another meeting for this one. Just to introduce myself, my name's Sharon Warmington, and I founded and run the National Black Governors Network, and that was purely because almost every situation I went into as a school governor or as a clerk or as a governance professional to undertake an external review of governance, I was usually the only Black person in the room. And approaching some of the mainstream organisations, the response was usually, well, Sharon, Black people are hard to find or hard to engage. And it's like, really? I don't think so. So that was why I started it. And it is unapologetically Black in the context of Black African Caribbean, and Black British heritage or ancestry. And the main reason for that is no matter what statistical measure you look at, Black people will always fall at the bottom. But once you start to look at things through the lens of race for Black people, it will automatically and positively impact all of the other protected characteristics. Whereas under other banners, we do still get lost. In terms of exclusions as a specific subject, I'm from Birmingham, so I know I have no knowledge of what's going on in your area. But in terms of exclusions, just some key things. It's not just about SEN students, because I've had exclusion panels in grammar schools, of Black and Asian students. So it's not just in terms of SEN. It is always about behaviour. And I have run workshops. I did a workshop for Camden and Islington stakeholder group for parents on understanding what leads to an exclusion. An exclusion never just happens unless it is a huge behaviour issue that's happened, but policy has to be followed. So if you want to understand about exclusions in any given school, first of all, read their behaviour policy, because only a head teacher can exclude, and a head teacher has to exclude on the basis of behaviour. So one school in their behaviour policy could say possession of a knife is grounds for immediate permanent exclusion, whereas in another school it may be a fight, or it might be a series of sanctions that haven't been adhered to, so it's a permanent exclusion. So it's understanding policy, and that's then where we need more Black representation, because once a child is permanently excluded, and I know fixed term exclusion is one of the ways of the numbers going up, and internal exclusions and all of that kind of stuff. But for permanent exclusions, they have to then go to the governing body, and the governing body has the power to overturn. But if the governing body is not representative of the community, then it's very difficult to even think about how that's going to happen. Preparing parents as well, because I've lost count of the amount of exclusion committees that I've been on. But when a parent comes to the table, either in denial of their child's behaviour, or ready to fight, the staff, that doesn't help. So one of the things that I like to do is prepare the parent to make sure that they are presenting themselves in that situation and ready to ask questions, because they have the right to question the evidence that is being brought before the panel, because the panel is usually not attached in any way. They haven't had any prior knowledge. They are only making the decision on the evidence that is presented in front of them. And so if you as a parent can counter that evidence or put a different view on that, then you can get a chance of having that exclusion overturned. But in my experience, an exclusion never just happens. It is on the back of repeated behavioural issues. So that's the thing to understand. And so when I'm putting an exclusion panel together, I always want to know the race and the gender of the child. And if it means I have to pull in a governor from a different school, or from a different trust, or wherever, I try and make sure there is representation on that panel for that child. Not that it's going to overturn the decision, but at least then there can be a different view, because we will always come to the space from our lived experiences, and you're not going to get that from an all-white panel. It's just not going to happen. So that's why it's important that we step up and actually take a seat at the table and lean all the way in. We can't just occupy the space. We have to start to change the space, because the change has to be top down. It will never come bottom up. It just won't happen. So that's me in a nutshell. I've put the MBGN website address in the chat. By all means, get in touch. I don't have all the answers. All I can come to you with is the governance aspect of it, the strategic aspect of it, because that's where policy change really takes place.
Oh, that's really valuable. Thank you so much for that. I don't actually see, if you could just maybe post it in the chat again. Yeah. But yeah, Sharon's doing amazing work. And obviously in the meantime, between time, while we're trying to change this, whole ideology around exclusion, we have to do what we can. So I think that's really important advice coming from Sharon. Also as well, Anntoinette, I was hoping maybe you could put a couple of links into the chat if you are able to enable people to, share that, the support that's available. Brilliant. So I'm going to bring in Susan, and then I was hoping that we could have a little bit more of an interchange, but also just thinking about how those relationships start to deteriorate. What is it with young people? Like we think about the demographic of teachers, their experiences, we think about the demographic of our schools. I personally think that there should be a correlation between the demographic of the students that should be reflected in the staff. So Susan, if you'd like to come in, I've got 7 for you. Then we've got a bit more time for backward and forward if people have got questions. So I'd just like to now introduce Councillor Susan Fajana-Thomas, who is a Cabinet Member for Communities and Safety. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thanks very much, Lucy. Thanks for organizing tonight. I'm glad to be here. I was smiling when the last speaker was Sharon around advocacy for parents. But before I go on to that, as Cabinet Member for Community Safety, Resilience, ASB, Crime and Disorder, and Youth Justice sit under my portfolio. So I've seen the problems in exclusion causes in the course of my work. While I don't support young people bad behaviors or minority disrupting the ability of majority to learn, I don't also believe that exclusion is the best tool to correct behavior. So as a party, that is one thing that I want to put out there. Or research suggests that exclusion does little to improve behavior, but aggravates alienation from school, places young people at risk of getting involved in antisocial behavior and crime. So that brings me to the question as a social justice campaigner. If this is the position as a party, why is it not time for us to now start thinking around or another approach or tools to actually correct bad behavior in schools? My vision as an elected member in Hackney, as a mother, as a resident, and that of, I believe, of Councillor Bramble, Mayor Phil Glanville, is for all our children and young people in Hackney to be purposefully engaged in an educational program appropriate to their needs and age, so that they flourish and become an asset to us as a community. And that is always, it breaks my heart when I hear information around exclusion. And because of this, in November, we had a meeting. That meeting was on one of the platform of the Community Safety Partnership called Community Resilience Partnership. The meeting focuses on exclusion, and it was a meeting that involved people from the community, parents, head teachers, governors, and people from the voluntary sector. So it was a sort of solution-focused meeting we had at the time. And some of the feedback we had from the people that were involved, talking about parents, governors, head teachers, where I'll just go over 5 of them, and we are hoping to work around them and take some of them or follow up on some of them. The first one was, I'm sure Jane Bassett mentioned this, and Sharon, who just spoke, mentioned it. It's about support for parents, parents having that advocate for parents to be able to engage with school, being able to engage with the process. If exclusion is happening, what they can do, or how to use the independent review or panel and all of that. That was one of the things that came up. The other one was around mapping of youth services, both statutory and voluntary sector provisions, so that we know we're in lockdown now, so that some of our young people that don't have that luxury is a sort of a public luxury for our young people, where they can go, where they can play, the provision that is available for them. The other thing that I've already mentioned is around racism, unconscious bias, saying that how can we engage or have training for teachers to understand what racism is. And this fourth one was better representation. Again, I've heard this, I think it was from Kadeem, youth voice, hearing the voices of the child in all what we do. And the last one that came on is linking housing issues with some of the things that happen to our young people, which is about background, the poverty, around some inequalities, around issues that again came up. So those things we are in discussion, and we are taking those forward. And at the moment, our integrated gang unit work on one-to-one with young people at risk of gang exploitation. Again, that has come up earlier. And there is another one-to-one work with young who might be truant. So all those work are things we are doing at the moment, and working with Councillor Bramble. We're hoping that one day there will be Hackney exclusion data would not be anything to discuss, but importantly, probably we're going to get to that point, not as a borough, but there's nothing stopping us from starting in Hackney, where we can have that discourse on how best to approach or to correct bad behavior in schools that does not focus on school exclusion. I'll pause there, conscious of the time is now just 15 minutes to the end of the event, but happy to take any questions. Thanks again.
Thank you, Susan. I really appreciate that. I think what you're saying about the discourse is really, really important. It is about excellence. And one of the questions that I would say is, you know, for example, Hamilton House, we had a legend in the basketball world that came out of that school. There's a whole generation of young men who remember the impact that Joe White had on them. And, you know, Hamilton is a City of London academy. They have one in Southwark that is a basketball academy. You know, can we do that in Hackney? You know, can we have a Joe White academy? Can we kind of like, you know, tap into, you know, the interests and, you know, the abilities, not to say it's just about sport, but, you know, basketball is a very intellectual game. And, you know, like, even if you think about sports science and scientists and engineers, I just feel that, you know, something like that would be good to kind of like establish that discourse. It doesn't necessarily have to be a black school, but a school that acknowledges the, you know, that impact and excellence of, you know, black people that have lived and, you know, worked in Hackney. So that's an idea I wanted to put out there. I was looking at Janet's comment. I think cultural capital is very much a relevant point when we're thinking about class, but also interpersonal interactions and, you know, what people assume is culturally acceptable and not, which, you know, does lead in again to having a diversity of teachers. And, you know, being a black teacher, you're very much often in a minority. Like, there has to be more tolerance and respect for different cultural values and sentiments. I think, you know, talking about the housing is fundamental when we think about the experiences that people are having, and then they, you know, go to school and they're under a regime that is very, very often different and doesn't take into consideration any of the impact of, you know, like if you're overcrowded, you haven't got your own room, you haven't got your own space, you know, you might not have had breakfast, or, you know, all kind of different factors. I think that it's important that school does take those things on board. So I did want to ask Caroline if she would like to come in. I know, as a Council of Children and Young People, we also have Sophie Conway. If people want to put their hand up and indicate, it would be good to hear from you. We've got about 10 minutes. So Caroline, you're unmuted. Can I bring you in?
Really quick.
Caroline Woodley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, I'll be really quick because I think it'd be great if Sophie could come in as well, because there's been really, really great work done in scrutiny. I just want to pick up on some of the points about the culture once you kind of enter a setting. And I guess I don't want to sort of like be too binary about it. Academy's bad, mainstream school's good. But there is a distinction in the culture of, in some settings where it's very much disciplinary, leave your day-to-day life at the door, versus the alternative, which we see as best practice, I think, in Hackney, which is know me before you teach me. And that approach was spoken about at scrutiny. And I thought that was really impactful. And I guess we do have a role as a local authority to kind of champion best practice and to educate and to train. And that idea that right from earlier settings where children from all different cultures with, sometimes 60 different languages, when they can kind of share information about that right from the start, be accepted, understood, as you say, within the teachers themselves, recognise themselves in those sort of figures of authority, you're at least off to the best start. And then in terms of intersectionality, I agree with both the comments here about let's focus on race, let's drill down on race. That was what was great about that last scrutiny commission. It looked very much at Black Caribbean children and what happens there. But I also agree with the point about intersectionality. When you combine class, when you combine race, and then you combine in there SEND, you are looking at a triple whammy sometimes of consequence for one young person. I mean, the comment in the chat about how you know how to play the game, how you can cross the line. Every child tests boundaries. Every child loses their temper. Every child crosses the line. Some of them know how to be polite and to apologise and to step back. You add in special educational needs. They some children just do not know when those boundaries are being crossed. So what you need to have is teachers who understand that and will not be punitive. And I think the kind of the key systemic change, and what we have seen destroyed really in a decade, is that sort of inclusive leadership team in schools that surround a SENCO. The amount of pressure and reliance that's put on the SENCOs is just unrealistic. You need inclusion leads to support them. You also need to recognise at times SENCOs get it wrong and relationships break down between a SENCO and a child. And at that point, who steps in? That relationship becomes so key. And one thing that Hackney Independent Parent Forum talks to me about a lot is how children on SEND support are tomorrow's children with education, health and care plans. If you can't support the children with a whole range of kind of special educational needs, we've got something like 10,000. You can include everything here from dyslexia to sort of impairments of whatever description you want to kind of imagine. If you can't support those children, you're allowing things to accumulate until more serious interventions need to take place, and there are consequences to that as well. So there is so much more to say. It'd be wonderful. I think this is a fantastic event, Lucy. I'd love to do one with you that's focused specifically on SEND. There are moments where you have to look at everything together, and there are moments where you have to drill down and concentrate on particular areas where we need to do more work. And thank you very much.
Thank you. No, and I know that you are passionate about working on those things. So thank you. I'm very aware that I owe Kadeem a talk. I asked him to wait, and then I went on without him. So I would like to bring you in, Kadeem. We're on a shortness of time, so I'm going to say a minute, if that's okay. And then I'd really like to hear from Kieran, and I also have Sophie and George who've got their hands up. So I apologise, Kadeem. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, no problem. What I basically just wanted to share quickly was just a photo of me in nursery, and I was already on the SEN register. So as nice and as innocent as I look, obviously I was being set up for failure and being given appropriate labels to facilitate, I guess, what the system wants to reproduce in a sense, which is poor outcomes for Black students. And I don't know, I felt like my family was attacked. As a 6-year-old, I'm noticing that things are being mentioned about my dad and single mothers and all, like, grown up with these negative perceptions firmly in my mind. So I think it's a bit it's a big issue, and it starts a lot earlier than a lot of people expect. I know there's a lot of exclusions in year 9, but there's a breadth of exclusions that are probably undiscovered in primary school as well for unexplained exits, and I guess that was where I was finished. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. But also thank you for being part of a movement that is trying to stop that and change it. So Kieran, I'm going to bring you in. Brilliant.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, I've been a youth worker for years, and I just want to kind of bring in that perspective, and just, you know, when we're making demands of like mainstream education and of what used to be called PRUs and all of these things, I think it's also, sometimes people think of maybe like a local community centre, the kids that I used to, like the young people that I used to support on an estate, Regent's estate in Hackney. A lot of those young people are young black boys who've been excluded from school, and a lot of people might see that as that work as a last resort, but to me, I see it as a first resort. Like, we need to have community agency where there are places where people can get the support and have these kind of discussions very early on, so that people, you know what I mean, so that, let's say you are excluded from school, you immediately have somewhere to go to talk to. You've got people who've had the same experiences in it. And I think the cuts that we've seen on community centres in Hackney has had a massive impact on particularly young black boys in the area. And you can really see that just walking around, just living here, let alone if you're connected to an institution or a particular estate or something like that. So I just wanted to mention that we need to demand that there is more support being given for like community centres and youth clubs and youth programs, because I think these are the things that are preventative measures in terms of the barriers that are being put up for particularly young black boys and young black people, young black working class people in Hackney. I also used to be a nursery worker for about a year. I worked in a nursery, and you can really see things clicking in immediately. You can see children being treated differently by educators from the minute that they're in the world, to be honest. And so, yeah, we need these things across all of these platforms. But I personally have agency as one of my favorite words, and I think it's really important that there are spaces that are outside of these institutions. Like there used to be a lot of Black History Saturday schools and things like that, and we need to bring those back. And it would be good if there was much more, if we demand services to be put. Yeah, anyway, I'm done.
Okay, no, I appreciate your contribution. I think
sorry
I've got
to interrupt.
like 4 minutes.
Do you mind if I just come in, because I've got to leave at 7 o'clock on the dot. I've got to chair a meeting, a council meeting, so okay. I definitely have to log off and log back in. A few things just about services to Hackney. Hackney has not cut youth provision for several years in terms of our youth hubs, I think, but what we've got to think about is how we absolutely let young people know what is out there. I agree with Kadeem in terms of agency, and thank you for sharing your story. I think it's so important that we remember that personal experience to children and young people. Hackney Youth Young Futures Commission wants to work with our governors to ensure that we have young governors on our governing bodies, but also better representation. And I think that is key as well. I think Lucy and Zahra, we're overdue another round table around exclusions. We haven't done one for a long time, and we have to extend that out to the unions as well. I think that's important. People mentioned recruitment. The council is doing a really big recruitment drive around diversity and ethnicity, and the schools are part of that. But remember, individual schools appoint their teachers and governing bodies, not the council. So it's the work that we do with heads and the unions to ensure that they're taking the right steps around that as well. I also wanted to say that we're also doing a programme where we give secondary schools a pot of money to work with children at risk of exclusions. One school did one around spoken word, and it was great to hear those young people. But equally, I was in a room with 15 young boys. We started at 9, we finished at 12, and it wasn't visible that any of those children were at risk of exclusion or demonstrated challenging behaviour. And why I give that example is when you put young people in the right environment with the right support, they are able to perform to their strength. I see Frida as an education person nodding away, and that just shows me when you get it right and put the right provision, every child has the right to thrive. I saw the school to prison pipeline slogan. The reason why I stay away from that is that I think that young black children get enough labels. And I don't want to be saying that I don't want young black children think when they go into our schools, that's their directory of travel. We absolutely need to get it right for the majority of the children where this has gone wrong. But, we don't want black children to think that, oh gosh, if they're in school, that's where they're going to end up. We need to stay aspirational for all of our young children and focus on this area where we need to improve. And hopefully over time, all of what we're doing will pay dividends. But we absolutely need you, those unions, party members, the woman, I think it's Sharon, working in governance, collectively, we can and will make a difference for all of our children, but we've just got to persevere. But thank you, Chair. On that note, I'm going to leave.
Just before you leave, though, like if someone knows someone or has got issues with exclusions, how would they find their way on the Hackney website? Where should they go?
So let me say quickly, if you Google Hackney Education Exclusions, there's a list of information that comes up on the website around law advice, around what to do, what the steps are. You can go to the engagement unit and get a young Hackney advocate. All of it's on the website. All right.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay. And thank you for your time.
Take care, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
So Sophie, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
The work that you do. I know you do a lot of really great work, so thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for putting this together. I'm really encouraged by everybody in the room and everything that people have had to say. It's just encouraging to know that we've got, a load of people who are all singing from the same hymn sheet with regards to this. It's interesting because for me, we're talking about exclusions and we're talking about disproportionality, which for me are two separate issues. They're two separate issues in the sense that exclusions are problematic and we need to deal with them. And disproportionality is about structural racism for me. The two combine to make a horrendous sort of situation for young black boys, but also in Hackney, actually, Turkish and Kurdish boys as well, which is something that a lot of people don't realise. And I think I don't want to go over some of the things that have already been covered by my colleagues on the council, but I wanted to speak about the piece of work that we've been doing on the Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission. We're soon to publish a report where we've been looking into the role that alternative provision plays, because I personally am not, I don't particularly like exclusions. I work for an organisation that does a lot of work to challenge exclusions. It's called Just for Kids Law. And I have historically represented children and families at exclusion hearings. So I'm not a fan of exclusions. However, the work that I wanted to do, because we had done previous work looking at exclusions, and to be fair, it didn't really go very far. It didn't go very far because there's only so much we can do as a local authority to influence what our individual schools do. We can say that, there's no need to exclude, but ultimately it's down to the individual schools, especially if we've got the number of academies that we do in the borough. So instead, I wanted to look at why on earth is it that once these children are excluded, that their life chances just fall off a cliff. And I wanted to look at the standard of the provision that we were providing our young people beyond school, and to understand what sort of thought process and what sort of choices are involved or open to parents, and to have a look at the sort of commissioning that we're doing. I can see from Zahra's comments, I'm not a fan of alternative provision. It's important for me to be honest about that, but I feel that right now, our young people are going into alternative provision. We've got young people who at school were doing 9 GCSEs and are going on to alternative provision where they're doing functional skills. Even if at this level, we need to be having a look at what it is that we're providing and to be reflecting on what we're commissioning, because, so that's something that we're focusing on, because it's an area that we haven't had the opportunity, I think, historically, to shed any light on, to look at what is happening to people beyond beyond school. But yeah, for me, disproportionality is about structural racism, and that is for us to look at every facet, every aspect of the council. Particular work that I do, I work with young parents. It tend to be young Black women who are disproportionately impacted by having their children removed, that are disproportionately impacted by having children's services involved in their families. And I watch from that work that I do, their children enter the same system that they entered into and being failed by the same systems, and their children end up in care. They have children who end up in care who also are excluded from school, whose partners, have been through the care system. It's horrendous. The trends are apparent for everybody to see. And gradually, I'd just like to sort of reassure people, I suppose, that for me, disproportionality is a focus of mine. I would like to think it's something that I'm unashamed about. And every time I have an opportunity to reflect on whatever work that it is that I do on the council, I will always unashamedly look at it through the lens of race, because that's my lived experience. It's the experience that I feel I'm conscious and exposed of in relation to the work that I do. There's also obviously always going to be more to learn and to do, and there are lots of people who I'd love to connect with after this evening to see how we can combine our efforts with my role as the chair of scrutiny to try and really see what we can do, even if it's in the interim, before we hopefully have a Labour government and have a bit more influence over what's going on to try and improve circumstances for young people in the borough.
Brilliant. No, and thank you. And like I said, you're doing some really valuable work there. If you're able to put an email in the chat, that'd be really useful. So time is rapidly running away. Jay, do you want to just come in quickly?
I've been doing work around school exclusions for about 15 years now. And nothing has changed, and nothing is going to change if we keep tinkering with it at the sides. We absolutely have to get to the point where there's absolutely no exclusions. And I think when we're talking about things like alternative provision, that's not the area that we should be going. We should be absolutely saying, look, we need to get parents to the point where they understand the system so that their children are not getting excluded. I've listened to Kadeem for the last 2 years, and every time I hear him, it gets to me, because I know that tomorrow I will get a call from a parent with a young person who's in exactly the same position that Kadeem was when he was 6 years old. And this is what my life has been for the last 15 years. I'm getting to the point where I'm burnt out because of the number of cases and the number of people that we have to constantly turn away and say no to. We need a local authority that stands up to academies. We need a local authority that is absolutely going to say, look, you may be an academy, but we have our safeguarding hat on, and we're going to go into this school because we have concerns about this child. And the only way to do that is for parents to know they can go to the local authority and know that you are going to be the person that's going to support them in that school, regardless of the status of that school. Anything else is tinkering with it. I've been through this education system. I'm a grandmother, great-grandmother now, and I'm still doing this. How long are we going to keep tinkering at the sides with this thing? We need Labour to stand up and say, you know what? No to exclusions. If you start from no, you then go, what do we do to support the young people and the children in schools who are having some struggles? It's about the environment, it's about relationships, it's this whole thing. Everything is all mishmashed together. Racism plays an absolute pivotal role in all of this. We can't simply ignore it and say that, oh, you know, we park it on the side for this bit. It's integral to the whole setup. And we have way too many young boys, especially like Kadeem, right at this moment, who get excluded from the virtual lesson. How are you getting excluded from virtual school? That just shows you that we are living in a system that says that you have to put punitive measures in place in order to educate your children. It's wrong and it's unfair, and it's killing our young people. When our young people return to school, they're coming from a position where their mental health has been under so much stress for the last year. And all I'm hearing about is excluding them because they're not following COVID guidelines. It's madness. It's crazy.
And it does. It highlights why it is so important that we're taking this forward. So thanks for that, Jay. And I would say, excuse me, hang on in there. Like, it sounds like you're doing really great work. Like, you know, it sounds like you're also involved with NME. So out of this meeting, I'm hoping that as a Labour Party member, I can be part of pushing on the policy, pushing on how a Labour Party Race Equality Act actually does start to tackle, you know, structural inequality and disproportionality. And it does have to be in, you know, involved with education at the heart of it, and about recruitment, and about what we teach teachers, and about what is in the curriculum, but also about, you know, behaviour, pastoral, putting you know, health and well-being at the centre of education, and it being inclusive. Education has, you know, very much in the last 10 years become very elitist, very commodified, you know, when really, as a health and social care teacher, education is about the, you know, physical, intellectual, emotional and social development of young people transitioning into adulthood, who are going to go on and, you know, be, you know, parents or whatever they choose to be in life. And we really need to kind of get back to that focus of what education is, so that nobody should be getting excluded in this way. So George, I'm going to give you 2 minutes tops, and then we've got a lock off, otherwise we'll be here all night. But there is a lot to be going forward with, which I think is really brilliant. So George.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you once again for organising this evening's meeting, which I've found very informative and thought-provoking. For those of us in the Labour Party, I do think it is extremely important to put pressure on Kate Green, Wes Streeting, etc., to actually accept a position that the objective should be no more exclusions. And I do think that actually relates to putting a halt to the academisation and free school program, and also starting to re-establish some sort of democratic, accountable control through local authorities over schools.
Definitely.
Now, locally, one area of concern is the extent of academisation, particularly in the secondary sector, and we have a substantial proportion of schools which are pre-2010 sponsored academies. Now, that's a situation where the report which circulated by Zahra in the chat, the integrated annual report from 2020, highlights the exceptionally high proportion in relative terms of exclusions in sponsored academies. But particularly, and this was highlighted in a piece on the Hackney Citizen website on Friday last week, there is a push by the Catholic Diocese of Westminster to further academise in both the primary and secondary schools, 2 secondary schools that are part of the Diocese of Westminster's education portfolio, and I believe it's 4 primary schools. Now, I know there is opposition in some cases from governing bodies. I did see a good statement quoted from Anntoinette, but I think this is an area that should be of concern for all of us who've been on this call, clearly concern for the NEU and other unions with support staff members, for instance. So that's, I think, a worrying development, the continued academisation of schools in the here and now, and obviously reiterate the point made earlier about changing Labour's policy to be firmly against the academisation and free school programme. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, George. And yeah, I mean, yourself, you're always at the forefront of, you know, pushing back on these like privatization, commodification, and you know that is really often what it comes down to. But it is about mobilising within the unions, so within Hackney NEU, but also nationally within the NEU, but also other unions supporting the education unions, I think is really important. And, you know, like we've got Unite, Unison that cover, you know, a lot of our support staff, like out of like educational support staff, many other workers within the school. I think if everybody's like pulling together and working on that, that is a good thing. And we have to keep pushing on academies. I know there's people here that have been very much involved with pushing back on the academisation, but also taking on board what Sharon was saying. It's really important that we get people into the governors, be at the table, be part of, the direction the school goes into, and also, hearing the exclusions and being able to, bring those things into question. So, I think also going forward as well, so Kieran, what you were saying, I'm hoping that you will connect with No More Exclusions, so that can also be, something else that can be a source of support for young people. NME is very much about having young people at the heart of its organisation as well. And I think, being in a space where you can share and realise that, it's not you, this is part of a system that institutionalises discriminatory racist behaviour. I think that's a really powerful, empowering thing. So just to say thank you so much to everybody for coming together and spending the time with us on this. And I'm hoping that, going forward, we can continue to make the kind of changes that Jay is desperate to see as well. And, Zahra can continue making progress with the work that she's doing, and, all of the other people here that are very committed to education and the future of young people. So thanks for coming. I did see Janet's hand up. I know you were a governor. I'll bring you in if you really did want to come in for a sec, and then we can say goodbye. Janet, do you want to have last word?
I said it in my chat. I didn't need to come in. I'm going to say and repeat what everybody else has been saying. Yes, I was a governor at Stoke Newington School for 12 years. And I dealt with exclusions. I think that we should get rid of exclusions. They're disproportionate, they're unfair. I also overturned a few times the head's decision, and always with black boys, sometimes with Turkish boys as well, because Stoke Newington, as someone said earlier, has a lot of Turkish boys as well. I also wanted to say that because we can't separate race and class, they have to be spoken together. And in terms of mental health in relation to black boys, I think that teachers and their peer groups who aren't from the BMAE community should realise that mental health and racism go together as well, and that needs to be addressed. We need to give more support to black parents. A lot of people have already said that as well, and how they deal with exclusions when somebody's excluded. I know somebody said that there's information on the website, but they need a bit more support than that, I think. And I was going to say one more thing. Yes, it always happens in year 9 and 10 whenever I was sat on an exclusion panel, but I always try to overturn the head teacher's decision as being a black governor, and sometimes I was the only black governor at one point. But I'm in agreement with George, we should get rid of exclusions. And Jay was saying, and that's all I want to say. I'm just repeating what everybody else has said.
No, thanks for that.
I'm stimming right now, yeah.
Can I just say one more thing? Really, and I really feel strongly about this, about the white middle class boys trying to play the game. I know somebody said about kids do that, but the white middle class boys, in particular at Stoke Newington School, always try to play the game. I never hardly had a white middle class boy in front of me. I just wanted to say that. Sorry, Kadeem, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I feel really strongly about those boys doing that. It's just something that I didn't like, and it's just that they knew how to play the game, and they knew when to speak and when to apologise. Sorry, that was it.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Can I quickly say something about that?
Yeah, you're going to finish us off, Kadeem.
Yeah, I'll finish you off. I'll finish it off, yeah, because, yeah, that's my whole thing. Like, I never apologised for how I behaved, and that's why I eventually got diagnosed with ODD, and my exclusion quickly escalated from school disturbances to me being in section in a child secure unit, basically. So mental health and racism does definitely go together in my personal experience, and I've never been shy about saying it, and that's probably a reason why I was excluded. So I just want to end it on that. I don't want to know that.
Thank you so much. And like, as always, like, thank you for sharing and being there, doing the work that you're doing. So Diane has left us, but I just wanted to say thank you to Diane for supporting this event and coming in. Zahra, No More Exclusions. So Zahra, Kadeem, Chuma, thank you so much for being part of this. And I'm hoping that, you know, we can get back and have conversations where we can look at how we can, you know, talk to Deputy Mayor Bramble, how we can get into that all parliamentary discussion and, you know, really have an impact on Labour Party education policy. So also I wanted to thank Jane for being here. I think Richard is long gone, but also thanks for his contribution. And Anntoinette, has, you know, thank you to her for the work that she's doing. And also Susan, thank you so much for being here, and hoping that, you know, we can work with you and be part of, you know, the work that you're doing going forward in the community. Sharon has also gone as well, but please, people, think about how we can encourage more governors to be in there, because in the meantime, it does seem like having Black governors at the table is really important in trying to tackle and address this situation. So that just leaves me to say thank you so much for coming. Take care. Hope to see you guys again soon to discuss something just as much of importance. And yeah, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves, and
Lucy,
work towards No More Exclusions.
Lucy, can we also thank you for organising such a fantastic
Yeah, I
week?
literally wanted to. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for coming, Essie. Appreciate your company.
Fantastic
Take care,
chat.
guys.
Well done.